A Apple Pie by Kate Greenway. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. A Apple Pie by Kate Greenway. Publisher's note. Kate Greenway used an early version of the rhyme to illustrate A Apple Pie, which was first published in 1886, and it will be noted that there is no rhyme for the letter I. The rhyme of A Apple Pie is very ancient, and reference is made to it as early as 1671 in one of the writings of John Eckerd. In these early versions, the letters I and J were not differentiated. The letter J, as we know it today, was the curved initial form of the letter I and was always used before a vowel. A apple pie. B bit it. C cut it. D dealt it. E eat it. F fought for it. G got it. H had it. J jumped for it. K knelt for it. L longed for it. M mourned for it. N nodded for it. O opened it. P peeped in it. Q quartered it. R ran for it. S sang for it. T took it. U, V, W, X, Y, Z all had a large slice and went off to bed. End of poem.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
All About the Little Small Red Hen by Anonymous. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. All About the Little Small Red Hen by Anonymous. Once upon a time, though I can't say exactly when, there lived away in the country a little small red hen. She wore a nice little apron and a little sunbonnet too, and she walked pickety-peckety as little hens always do. She had lived the whole of her little life in the same little house. It stood all by itself in a lonely spot just at the edge of a wood. It was very snug and cozy and warm, and the garden wasn't big, but just what a little small red hen could nicely manage to dig. And once upon a time, just the same time, of course, there also lived a wicked old fox among the heath and gorse. Silently, slyly, he crept round the field, stealing geese and ducks and cocks, dressed in a hat and a long grey coat, this wicked, cunning old fox. His house was perched on top of the hill. It was made of rock and stone. He and his wife, Old Mother Fox, they lived there all alone. It was large and damp and draughty, ugly and cold and bare. A tidy little small red hen would never be happy there. Now the wicked old fox had often tried, over and over again, to catch by some sly trick or other the little small red hen, but she was far too clever for him. She never let him find her, and whenever she left her little house she would lock the door behind her. One morning, very early indeed, before the sun was hot, the wicked old fox said to Mother Fox, "Put on the big black pot. I'm going to have another try. I shall soon be back, and then, I promise you'll see, at last I've caught the little small red hen." So he put on his cap and shouldered a sack, and walked very sly and slow, and after a while he came in sight of the snug little house below, and he laid the sack very softly down on the ground behind a tree, and then he lay down to wait and watch, as quiet could be. He was getting tired of waiting there when the house door opened wide, and the little small red hen came forth to gather sticks outside. Walking pickety-peckety, exceedingly neat and prim, and the wicked old fox lay watching. She never once thought of him. While she was picking up the sticks, he slipped behind the door, and laughed ho-ho to himself very low as he put the sack on the floor. He stood there hiding and chuckling, and peeping through the crack, and he saw the little small red hen, in a minute or two, come back. She stepped inside with her bundle of sticks, as cheerful as one could be, when the wicked old fox sprang full at her throat. "I've got you now," cried he. "What good are bolts and bars?" he said. "How silly you must be, to think that they could ever keep out a cunning old fox like me." Of course the poor little small red hen was now in a terrible fright. She gave a scream and dropped her sticks. They tumbled left and right. But she just had time to fly on a beam that went across overhead, quite out of reach of the wicked old fox. "But I'll have you yet," he said. Then he began to run round and round and round and round beneath, looking up every now and then, laughing and showing his teeth. It made her dreadfully dizzy and faint. She gave a cluck and a lurch. She gave a flap and a flutter and flop, and fell right off her perch. Then the wicked old fox threw open his sack, and in less than half a minute he had picked her up with a cry of joy and hastily stuffed her in it. He swung it over his shoulder, smiled, and started off for his den. "How nice you'll be for supper," said he, "my dear little small red hen." So there she was, poor thing, you see, shut up quite tight in the sack. She found it most unpleasant there, close and stuffy and black. But she thought of her little scissors, in her apron pocket hid. "I will cut a hole and see where I am," she said, and so she did. Now the sun was hot, and all the time it was getting hotter still, and the wicked old fox grew very tired as he climbed the heathy hill. He dropped on mossy bank and said, "It may be lazy, but I think I'll just have 40 winks," and his wicked eyes blinked and shut. The little small red hen, indeed, was also very glad to rest a bit from the jogs and jolts and the bangs and bumps she had. And she thought, "If I cut a little hole, why not a big one, too?" And she cut a slit that was long enough to let her whole self through. Wasn't she pleased to be free again? She said, "I must run double quick, but before I go I'll manage to play the wicked old fox a trick." And she took a great big knobby stone as large as a lump of coal, and heaved and pushed and heaved till she got it through the hole. And then she scuttled panting home as fast as her legs would go, not walking pickety-peckety this time, oh dear no. She scuttered and fluttered down the hill and scampered through her door. "Thank goodness," she said, all out of breath, "I'm safe at home once more." But when the wicked old fox woke up, it was getting dark and late. He shouldered the sack and found it now a most remarkable weight. "Dear me," he said, "she weighs like a goose. I thought she'd be light as a wren. What a splendid supper we'll have tonight of the little small red hen." So heavily, wearily trudged he home, and kept shifting the sack about. And when at last he came to his door, there was old Mother Fox looking out. She said to him, "You look tired, my dear," and he answered, "Ah, she's caught." And he puffed and licked his lips and said, "She's twice as fat as I thought." He asked, "My love, is the pot on the boil?" "It's boiling fast," she replied. He said, "Then take the lid off, my dear, and we'll pop her plump inside." So old Mother Fox took off the lid, hot and steaming and black, while the wicked old fox with hurry and haste untied the mouth of his sack. And splash went in the great big stone, and it was a splash, my word. I don't suppose a splash so loud has ever before been heard. The bees and birds and bunnies all, who had gone to bed for the night, for miles around woke up with a jump and a most tremendous fright. And the boiling water in the pot splashed out on every side, and terribly scalded the wicked old fox and old Mother Fox, and they died. There they lay all still and stark up in the house on the hill. There they lay, and for all I know, there they are lying still. But the hen lived happily just as before in her dear little house by the wood, walking pickety-peckety, working as hard as she could. "I've had a great many troubles. I hope they won't happen again. Anything for a quiet life," said the little small red hen. The End. End of All About the Little Small Red Hen by Anonymous. Read by Troy Bond.
Baseball ABC by Anonymous. As read by Laura Harrington. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Baseball ABC by Anonymous. A stands for Arthur, a boy fond of fun. When baseball he plays, none like him can run. B stands for ball, for bat, and for base. C stands for catcher, with mask on his face. D stands for diamond, drawn flat on the ground. E stands for Edward, who marks out the bound. F stands for foul, on which Arthur goes out. G stands for go, how the merry boys shout. H stands for high ball, knocked up to the sky. I stands for innings, for which we all try. J stands for judgment, the base keepers shout. K stands for Carl, who so quickly gets out. L stands for left field, who catches fly balls. M stands for Muff, who cannot catch it all. N stands for Norman, who knocks the ball high. O stands for Out, when it's caught on the fly. P stands for Pitcher, our smart boy, you see. Q stands for Quick, which this pitcher must be. R stands for Runner, who runs to each base. S stands for Shortstop, the ball he must chase. T stands for Third Base, looked after by James. U stands for Umpire, who judges these games. V stands for Victor, the best of the 9. W stands for William, who tells us the time. X stands for Score Mark, which errors point out. Y stands for Youth, who's been injured, no doubt. Z stands for Zeno, this boy rather tall, who thinks there's no fun like a game of baseball. End of Baseball ABC by Anonymous.
The Beautiful World, from the Nursery Book of Bible Stories by Amy Stedman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Hannah Harris. The Beautiful World, from the Nursery Book of Bible Stories by Amy Stedman. When night comes down and everything is dark and black, we sometimes are a little afraid, for we cannot see all the pleasant things around us, and it makes us feel lonely to be in the dark. The very first thing of all we want is light. So it was, when God made the world, that the very first thing he did was to make the light. It had all been quite dark until he looked down and said, "Let there be light." And then the beautiful light came. There were many things to be done after that. There was the light to be divided into day and night, and the sky and the land and the sea to be made, and set all in their right places. And as God worked, he was glad, because he saw that it was all going to be very beautiful and very good. But still the earth was quite bare, worse even than the garden in winter, when all the flowers are dead, because there had never been any trees or flowers or grass at all. So then God made a glad springtime to come bursting over the earth, and flowers and trees began to grow, and green leaves and buds and corn began to sprout, and instead of a bare, dark world, there was a great garden, all clothed in a beautiful green dress and starred with flowers. Now, there is one thing which a garden needs above everything else, and that is sunshine. So God made the sun to shine down from the blue sky in the daytime, and he made the silver moon that hangs up there like a great lamp in the night time, and all the stars that shine like diamonds in the sky. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, God arranged them all, so that everything should grow in its right time. It was a very silent earth still, for trees and flowers grow very quietly, but soon the sweet sound of music came stealing into the world, for after making all the fishes that swim in the seas and rivers and streams, God made the dear birds that chirp and twitter as they fly about. He taught them, too, to make their nests and bring up the baby birds, so that we should always have birds in the world to sing their songs to us. Now in the air there was the sound of fluttering wings, and in the water the fishes swam and flashed their tails, and only the earth was waiting for the animals and insects that were to make it their home. So God next made all the beasts and cattle and all the creeping things, and when he looked down he saw it was all very good. Then it was that God made the greatest thing of all, for it was something that was made in his own image, which means like God himself. He made the first man, Adam, and the first woman, Eve, and he made them different to all the other things which he had created, because he put into them some of his own life, the part of us which we call our soul. At first the two people whom God had made were very happy indeed. They lived in the most beautiful garden, where all the most wonderful trees and flowers grew. There was nothing to harm them and everything to make them happy. All the animals and birds were their friends, and Adam gave all of them names. And there was no suffering or pain in the garden, because everything was good. Then a sad day came, when Eve was disobedient and all the happiness was spoilt. God had said that Adam and Eve might enjoy all the delicious fruit that grew in the garden, except the fruit of one special tree which they were forbidden to touch. But the tempter came and whispered to Eve that it was very hard that she should not touch that fruit, and that God would not really punish her if she did. Poor Eve was not wise enough to listen to the voice inside her, which told her she must not disobey God. And so she did as the tempter suggested, and all the happiness in that beautiful garden came to an end. Neither Adam nor Eve had ever known before what fear meant, but now that they had disobeyed God, they were afraid to meet him, and went and hid themselves. And God was very sorrowful to think his children had disobeyed him, and by their wrongdoing had brought sin and death into the beautiful world which he had made so good. No longer could Adam and Eve live in the fair garden, for they must be punished, and God sent them out and placed his angels with flaming swords to guard the way back. It had been easy work for Adam in the garden to look after all the growing things, but now it was very difficult. Thorns and thistles and all kinds of weeds began to spring up and to choke the good plants, and Adam had to toil hard from morning till night, and Eve too soon learned what it meant to be tired and sorrowful. But even then there was still some happiness left, for God sent Eve a great gift, the gift of a little son. She called his name Cain. And afterwards another baby boy was born, and this second boy she called Abel. Perhaps she thought she could never be very sorrowful again, now that she had 2 boys to love and care for. But, sad to say, as the boys grew up, sorrow and sin crept in again. Cain began to be jealous of his younger brother. From angry, jealous thoughts came angry words, until at last followed angry blows, and Cain killed his brother out in the fields, where he thought no one could see him. But he forgot that God sees everything we do, even when we think we are quite alone, and his punishment followed swiftly. God put a mark upon his brow and sent him to wander alone out into the world, far away from his home and his mother. Then Eve knew, even better than before, all the trouble and pain and suffering which sin had brought into the world. End of The Beautiful World, from the Nursery Book of Bible Stories by Amy Stedman. Read by Hannah Harris. August 12, 2010.
Beauty and the Beast, from the French of Madame Gabrielle de Villeneuve. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Bologna Times. Beauty and the Beast, by Madame Gabrielle de Villeneuve. There was once a very rich merchant who had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. As he was himself a man of great sense, he spared no expense for their education. The 3 daughters were all handsome, but particularly the youngest. Indeed, she was so very beautiful that in her childhood everyone called her the Little Beauty, and being equally lovely when she was grown up, nobody called her by any other name, which made her sisters very jealous of her. This youngest daughter was not only more handsome than her sisters, but also was better tempered. The 2 eldest were vain of their wealth and position. They gave themselves 1,000 airs, and refused to visit other merchants' daughters, nor would they condescend to be seen except with persons of quality. They went every day to balls, plays, and public walks, and always made game of their youngest sister for spending her time in reading or other useful employments. As it was well known that these young ladies would have large fortunes, many great merchants wished to get them for wives. But the 2 eldest always answered that, for their parts, they had no thoughts of marrying any one below a duke or an earl at least. Beauty had quite as many offers as her sisters, but she always answered, with the greatest civility, that though she was much obliged to her lovers, she would rather live some years longer with her father, as she thought herself too young to marry. It happened that, by some unlucky accident, the merchant suddenly lost all his fortune, and had nothing left but a small cottage in the country. Upon this he said to his daughters, while the tears ran down his cheeks, "My children, we must now go and dwell in the cottage, and try to get a living by labor, for we have no other means of support." The two eldest replied that they did not know how to work, and would not leave town, for they had lovers enough who would be glad to marry them, though they had no longer any fortune. But in this they were mistaken, for when the lovers heard what had happened, they said, "The girls were so proud and ill-tempered that all we wanted was their fortune. We are not sorry at all to see their pride brought down. Let them show off their heirs to their cows and sheep." But everybody pitied poor Beauty, because she was so sweet-tempered and kind to all, and several gentlemen offered to marry her, though she had not a penny. But Beauty still refused, and said she could not think of leaving her poor father in his trouble. At first Beauty could not help sometimes crying in secret for the hardships she was now obliged to suffer. But in a very short time she said to herself, "All the crying in the world will do me no good, so I will try to be happy without a fortune." When they had removed to their cottage, the merchant and his 3 sons employed themselves in plowing and sowing the fields, and working in the garden. Beauty also did her part, for she rose by 4 o'clock every morning, lighted the fires, cleaned the house, and got ready the breakfast for the whole family. At first she found all this very hard, but she soon grew quite used to it, and thought it no hardship. Indeed, the work greatly benefited her health. When she had done, she used to amuse herself with reading, playing her music, or singing while she spun. But her 2 sisters were at a loss what to do to pass the time away. They had their breakfast in bed, and did not rise till 10 o'clock. Then they commonly walked out, but always found themselves very soon tired, when they would often sit down under a shady tree, and grieve for the loss of their carriage and fine clothes, and say to each other, "What a mean-spirited, poor, stupid creature our young sister is, to be so content with this low way of life." But their father thought differently, and loved and admired his youngest child more than ever. After they had lived in this manner about a year, the merchant received a letter, which informed him that one of his richest ships, which he thought was lost, had just come into port. The news made the 2 eldest sisters almost mad with joy, for they thought they should now leave the cottage, and have all their finery again. When they found that their father must take a journey to the ship, the 2 eldest begged he would not fail to bring them back some new gowns, caps, rings, and all sorts of trinkets. But Beauty asked for nothing, for she thought in herself that all the ship was worth would hardly buy everything her sisters wished for. "Beauty," said the merchant, "how comes it that you ask for nothing? What can I bring you, my child?" "Since you are so kind as to think of me, dear father," she answered, "I should be glad if you would bring me a rose, for we have none in our garden." Now Beauty did not indeed wish for a rose, nor anything else, but she only said this that she might not affront her sisters. Otherwise they would have said she wanted her father to praise her for desiring nothing. The merchant took his leave of them, and set out on his journey. But when he got to the ship, some persons went to law with him about the cargo, and after a deal of trouble he came back to his cottage as poor as he had left it. When he was within 30 miles of his home, and thinking of the joy of again meeting his children, he lost his way in the midst of a dense forest. It rained and snowed very hard, and besides the wind was so high as to throw him twice from his horse. Night came on, and he feared he should die of cold and hunger, or be torn to pieces by the wolves that he heard howling round him. All at once he cast his eyes towards a long avenue, and saw at the end a light, but it seemed a great way off. He made the best of his way towards it, and found that it came from a splendid palace, the windows of which were all blazing with light. It had great bronze gates, standing wide open, and fine courtyards, through which the merchant passed, but not a living soul was to be seen. There were stables, too, which his poor starved horse, less scrupulous than himself, entered at once, and took a good meal of oats and hay. His master then tied him up, and walked towards the entrance hall, but still without seeing a single creature. He went on to a large dining parlor, where he found a good fire, and a table covered with some very nice dishes, but only one plate with a knife and fork. As the snow and rain had wetted him to the skin, he went up to the fire to dry himself. "I hope," said he, "the master of the house or his servants will excuse me, for it surely will not be long now before I see them." He waited some time, but still nobody came. At last the clock struck 11, and the merchant, being quite faint for the want of food, helped himself to a chicken, and to a few glasses of wine, yet all the time trembling with fear. He sat till the clock struck 12, and then, taking courage, began to think he might as well look about him. So he opened a door at the end of the hall, and went through it into a very grand room, in which there was a fine bed. And, as he was feeling very weary, he shut the door, took off his clothes, and got into it. It was 10 o'clock in the morning before he awoke, when he was amazed to see a handsome new suit of clothes laid ready for him, instead of his own, which were all torn and spoiled. "To be sure," said he to himself, "this place belongs to some good fairy, who has taken pity on my ill luck." He looked out of the window, and instead of the snow-covered wood, where he had lost himself the previous night, he saw the most charming arbors, covered with all kinds of flowers. Returning to the hall where he had supped, he found a breakfast table ready prepared. "Indeed, my good fairy," said the merchant aloud, "I am vastly obliged to you for your kind care of me." He then made a hearty breakfast, took his hat, and was going to the stable to pay his horse a visit. But as he passed under one of the arbors, which was loaded with roses, he thought of what Beauty had asked him to bring back to her, and so he took a bunch of roses to carry home. At the same moment he heard a loud noise, and saw coming towards him a beast, so frightful to look at that he was ready to faint with fear. "Ungrateful man," said the beast, in a terrible voice, "I have saved your life by admitting you into my palace, and in return you steal my roses, which I value more than anything I possess. But you shall atone for your fault. You shall die in a quarter of an hour." The merchant fell on his knees, and, clasping his hands, said, "Sir, I humbly beg your pardon. I did not think it would offend you to gather a rose for one of my daughters, who had entreated me to bring her one home. Do not kill me, my lord." "I am not a lord, but a beast," replied the monster. "I hate false compliments, so do not fancy that you can coax me by any such ways. You tell me that you have daughters. Now I will suffer you to escape, if one of them will come and die in your stead. If not, promise me that you will yourself return in 3 months, to be dealt with as I may choose." The tender-hearted merchant had no thoughts of letting any one of his daughters die for his sake, but he knew that if he seemed to accept the beast's terms, he should at least have the pleasure of seeing them once again. So he gave his promise, and was told he might set off as soon as he liked. "But," said the beast, "I do not wish you to go back empty-handed. Go to the room you slept in, and you will find a chest there. Fill it with whatsoever you like best, and I will have it taken to your own house for you." When the beast had said this, he went away. The good merchant, left to himself, began to consider that as he must die, for he had no thought of breaking a promise made even to a beast, he might as well have the comfort of leaving his children provided for. He returned to the room he had slept in, and found there heaps of gold pieces lying about. He filled the chest with them to the very brim, locked it, and mounting his horse, left the palace as sorrowful as he had been glad when he first beheld it. The horse took a path across the forest of his own accord, and in a few hours they reached the merchant's house. His children came running round him, but, instead of kissing them with joy, he could not help weeping as he looked at them. He held in his hand the bunch of roses, which he gave to Beauty, saying, "Take these roses, Beauty, but little do you think how dear they have cost your poor father." And then he gave them an account of all that he had seen or heard in the palace of the beast. The two eldest sisters now began to shed tears, and to lay the blame upon Beauty, who, they said, would be the cause of her father's death. "See," said they, "what happens from the pride of the little wretch. Why did not she ask for such things as we did? But, to be sure, Miss must not be like other people, and though she will be the cause of her father's death, yet she does not shed a tear." "It would be useless," replied Beauty, "for father shall not die. As the beast will accept of one of his daughters, I will give myself up, and be only too happy to prove my love for the best of fathers." "No, sister," said the three brothers with one voice, "that cannot be. We will go in search of this monster, and either he or we will perish." "Do not hope to kill him," said the merchant. "His power is far too great. But Beauty's young life shall not be sacrificed. I am old, and cannot expect to live much longer, so I shall but give up a few years of my life, and shall only grieve for the sake of my children." "Never, father!" cried Beauty. "If you go back to the palace, you cannot hinder my going after you. Though young, I am not over fond of life, and I would much rather be eaten up by the monster than die of grief for your loss." The merchant in vain tried to reason with Beauty, who still obstinately kept to her purpose, which in truth made her two sisters glad, for they were jealous of her, because everybody loved her. The merchant was so grieved at the thoughts of losing his child that he never once thought of the chest filled with gold, but at night, to his great surprise, he found it standing by his bedside. He said nothing about his riches to his eldest daughters, for he knew very well it would at once make them want to return to town. But he told Beauty his secret, and she then said that while he was away, two gentlemen had been on a visit at their cottage who had fallen in love with her two sisters. She entreated her father to marry them without delay, for she was so sweet-natured she only wished them to be happy. 3 months went by, only too fast, and then the merchant and Beauty got ready to set out for the palace of the beast. Upon this, the two sisters rubbed their eyes with an onion to make believe they were crying. Both the merchant and his sons cried in earnest. Only Beauty shed no tears. They reached the palace in a very few hours, and the horse, without bidding, went into the same stable as before. The merchant and Beauty walked towards the large hall, where they found a table covered with every dainty, and 2 plates laid ready. The merchant had very little appetite, but Beauty, that she might the better hide her grief, placed herself at the table, and helped her father. She then began to eat herself, and thought all the time that, to be sure, the beast had a mind to fatten her up before he ate her up, since he had provided such good cheer for her. When they had done their supper, they heard a great noise, and the good man began to bid his poor child farewell, for he knew it was the beast coming to them. When Beauty first saw that frightful form, she was very much terrified, but tried to hide her fear. The creature walked up to her and eyed her all over, then asked her in a dreadful voice if she had come quite of her own accord. "Yes," said Beauty. "Then you are a good girl, and I am very much obliged to you." This was such an astonishingly civil answer that Beauty's courage rose, but it sank again when the beast, addressing the merchant, desired him to leave the palace next morning, and never to return to it again. "And so good night, merchant, and good night, Beauty." "Good night, beast," she answered, as the monster shuffled out of the room. "Ah, my dear child," said the merchant, kissing his daughter, "I am half dead already at the thought of leaving you with this dreadful beast. You shall go back and let me stay in your place." "No," said Beauty boldly, "I will never agree to that. You must go home tomorrow morning." Then they wished each other good night, and went to bed, both of them thinking they should not be able to close their eyes. But as soon as ever they had lain down, they fell into a deep sleep, and did not awake till morning. Beauty dreamed that a lady came up to her, who said, "I am very much pleased, Beauty, with the goodness you have shown, in being willing to give your life to save that of your father. Do not be afraid of anything. You shall not go without a reward." As soon as Beauty awoke, she told her father this dream, but though it gave him some comfort, he was a long time before he could be persuaded to leave the palace. At last Beauty succeeded in getting him safely away. When her father was out of sight, poor Beauty began to weep sorely. Still, having naturally a courageous spirit, she soon resolved not to make her sad case still worse by sorrow, which she knew was vain, but to wait and be patient. She walked about to take a view of all the palace, and the elegance of every part of it much charmed her. But what was her surprise when she came to a door on which was written "Beauty's room." She opened it in haste, and her eyes were dazzled by the splendor and taste of the apartment. What made her wonder more than all the rest was a large library filled with books, a harpsichord, and many pieces of music. "The beast surely does not mean to eat me up immediately," said she. "Since he takes care I shall not be at a loss how to amuse myself." She opened the library, and saw these verses written in letters of gold on the back of one of the books: "Beauteous lady, dry your tears. Here's no cause for sighs or fears. Command as freely as you may, for you command and I obey." "Alas!" said she, sighing, "I wish I could only command a sight of my poor father, and to know what he is doing at this moment." Just then, by chance, she cast her eyes on a looking glass that stood near her, and in it she saw a picture of her old home, and her father riding mournfully up to the door. Her sisters came out to meet him, and although they tried to look sorry, it was easy to see that in their hearts they were very glad. In a short time all this picture disappeared, but it caused Beauty to think that the beast, besides being very powerful, was also very kind. About the middle of the day she found a table laid ready for her, and a sweet concert of music played all the time she was dining, without her seeing anybody. But at supper, when she was going to seat herself at table, she heard the noise of the beast, and could not help trembling with fear. Beauty, said he, will you give me leave to see you sup? That is as you please, answered she, very much afraid. Not in the least, said the beast. You alone command in this place. If you should not like my company, you need only say so, and I will leave you that moment. But tell me, Beauty, do you not think me very ugly? Why, yes, said she, for I cannot tell a falsehood. But then I think you are very good. Am I? Sadly replied the beast. Yet, besides being ugly, I am also very stupid. I know well enough that I am but a beast. Very stupid people, said Beauty, are never aware of it themselves. At which kindly speech the beast looked pleased, and replied, not without an awkward sort of politeness, Pray do not let me detain you from supper, and be sure that you are well served. All you see is your own, and I should be deeply grieved if you wanted for anything. You are very kind, so kind that I almost forgot you are so ugly, said Beauty earnestly. Ah, yes, answered the beast, with a great sigh. I hope I am good-tempered, but still I am only a monster. There is many a monster who wears the form of a man. It is better of the two to have the heart of a man and the form of a monster. I would thank you, Beauty, for this speech, but I am too senseless to say anything that would please you, returned the beast, in a melancholy voice, and altogether he seemed so gentle and so unhappy that Beauty, who had the tenderest heart in the world, felt her fear of him gradually vanish. She ate her supper with a good appetite, and conversed in her own sensible and charming way, till at last, when the beast rose to depart, he terrified her more than ever by saying abruptly, in his gruff voice, Beauty, will you marry me? Now Beauty, frightened as she was, would speak only the exact truth. Besides, her father had told her that the beast liked only to have the truth spoken to him. So she answered, in a very firm tone, No, beast. He did not go into a passion, or do anything but sigh deeply, and depart. When Beauty found herself alone, she began to feel pity for the poor beast. Oh, said she, what a sad thing it is that he should be so very frightful, since he is so good-tempered. Beauty lived 3 months in this palace, very well pleased. The beast came to see her every night, and talked with her while she supped, and though what he said was not very clever, yet as she saw in him every day some new goodness, instead of dreading the time of his coming, she soon began continually looking at her watch, to see if it were 9 o'clock, for that was the hour when he never failed to visit her. One thing only vexed her, which was that every night before he went away, he always made it a rule to ask her if she would be his wife, and seemed very much grieved at her steadfastly replying no. At last, one night, she said to him, You wound me greatly, beast, by forcing me to refuse you so often. I wish I could take such a liking to you as to agree to marry you, but I must tell you plainly that I do not think it will ever happen. I shall always be your friend, so try to let that content you. I must, sighed the beast, for I know well enough how frightful I am, but I love you better than myself. Yet I think I am very lucky in your being pleased to stay with me. Now promise me, Beauty, that you will never leave me. Beauty would almost have agreed to this, so sorry was she for him, but she had that day seen in her magic glass, which she looked at constantly, that her father was dying of grief for her sake. Alas, she said, I long so much to see my father that if you do not give me leave to visit him, I shall break my heart. I would rather, break mine, Beauty," answered the beast. "I will send you to your father's cottage. You shall stay there, and your poor beast shall die of sorrow." "No," said Beauty, crying. "I love you too well to be the cause of your death. I promise to return in a week. You have shown me that my sisters are married, and my brothers are gone for soldiers, so that my father is left all alone. Let me stay a week with him." "You shall find yourself with him tomorrow morning," replied the beast. "But mind, do not forget your promise. When you wish to return you have nothing to do but to put your ring on a table when you go to bed. Good bye, Beauty." The beast sighed as he said these words, and Beauty went to bed very sorry to see him so much grieved. When she awoke in the morning she found herself in her father's cottage. She rang a bell that was at her bedside, and a servant entered. But as soon as she saw Beauty, the woman gave a loud shriek, upon which the merchant ran upstairs, and when he beheld his daughter, he ran to her and kissed her 100 times. At last Beauty began to remember that she had brought no clothes with her to put on, but the servant told her she had just found in the next room a large chest full of dresses, trimmed all over with gold, and adorned with pearls and diamonds. Beauty, in her own mind, thanked the beast for his kindness, and put on the plainest gown she could find among them all. She then desired the servant to lay the rest aside, for she intended to give them to her sisters. But as soon as she had spoken these words, the chest was gone out of sight in a moment. Her father then suggested perhaps the beast chose for her to keep them all for herself, and as soon as he had said this, they saw the chest standing again in the same place. While Beauty was dressing herself, a servant brought word to her that her sisters were come with their husbands to pay her a visit. They both lived unhappily with the gentleman they had married. The husband of the eldest was very handsome, but was so proud of this that he thought of nothing else from morning till night, and did not care a pin for the beauty of his wife. The second had married a man of great learning, but he made no use of it, except to torment and affront all his friends, and his wife more than any of them. The two sisters were ready to burst with spite when they saw Beauty dressed like a princess, and looking so very charming. All the kindness that she showed them was of no use, for they were vexed more than ever when she told them how happy she lived at the palace of the beast. The spiteful creatures went by themselves into the garden, where they cried to think of her good fortune. "Why should the little wretch be better off than we?" said they. "We are much handsomer than she is." "Sister," said the eldest, "a thought has just come into my head. Let us try to keep her here longer than the week for which the beast gave her leave, and then he will be so angry that perhaps when she goes back to him he will eat her up in a moment." "That is well thought of," answered the other, "but to do this we must pretend to be very kind." They then went to join her in the cottage, where they showed her so much false love that Beauty could not help crying for joy. When the week was ended, the two sisters began to pretend such grief at the thought of their leaving them that she agreed to stay a week more. But all that time Beauty could not help fretting for the sorrow that she knew her absence would give her poor beast, for she tenderly loved him, and much wished for his company again. Among all the grand and clever people she saw, she found nobody who was half so sensible, so affectionate, so thoughtful, or so kind. The 10th night of her being at the cottage, she dreamed she was in the garden of the palace, that the beast lay dying on a grass plot, and with his last breath put her in mind of her promise, and laid his death to her forsaking him. Beauty awoke in a great fright, and burst into tears. "Am not I wicked," said she, "to behave so ill to a beast, who has shown me so much kindness? Why will I not marry him? I am sure I should be more happy with him than my sisters are with their husbands. He shall not be wretched any longer on my account, for I should do nothing but blame myself all the rest of my life." She then rose, put her ring on the table, got into bed again, and soon fell asleep. In the morning she with joy found herself in the palace of the beast. She dressed herself very carefully, that she might please him the better, and thought she had never known a day pass away so slowly. At last the clock struck 9, but the beast did not come. Beauty, dreading lest she might truly have caused his death, ran from room to room, calling out, "Beast, dear beast!" but there was no answer. At last she remembered her dream, rushed to the grass plot, and there saw him lying apparently dead beside the fountain. Forgetting all his ugliness, she threw herself upon his body, and, finding his heart still beat, she fetched some water and sprinkled it over him, weeping and sobbing the while. The beast opened his eyes. "You forgot your promise, Beauty, and so I determined to die, for I could not live without you. I have starved myself to death, but I shall die content, since I have seen your face once more." "No, dear beast," cried Beauty passionately, "you shall not die. You shall live to be my husband. I thought it was only friendship I felt for you, but now I know it was love." The moment Beauty had spoken these words, the palace was suddenly lighted up, and all kinds of rejoicings were heard around them, none of which she noticed, but hung over her dear beast with the utmost tenderness. At last, unable to restrain herself, she dropped her head over her hands, covered her eyes, and cried for joy. And when she looked up again, the beast was gone. In his stead she saw at her feet a handsome, graceful young prince, who thanked her with the tenderest expressions for having freed him from enchantment. "But where is my poor beast? I only want him, and nobody else," sobbed Beauty. She saw at her feet a handsome, graceful young prince. "I am he," replied the prince. "A wicked fairy condemned me to this form, and forbade me to show that I had any wit or sense, till a beautiful lady should consent to marry me. You alone, dearest Beauty, judge me neither by my looks nor by my talents, but by my heart alone. Take it, then, and all that I have besides, for all is yours." Beauty, full of surprise but very happy, suffered the prince to lead her to his palace, where she found her father and sisters, who had been brought there by the fairy lady whom she had seen in a dream the first night she came. "Beauty," said the fairy, "you have chosen well, and you have your reward, for a true heart is better than either good looks or clever brains. As for you, ladies," and she turned to the two elder sisters, "I know all your ill deeds, but I have no worse punishment for you than to see your sister happy. You shall stand as statues at the door of her palace, and when you repent of and have amended your faults, you shall become women again. But to tell you the truth, I very much fear you will remain statues forever." End of Beauty and the Beast by Madame Gabrielle de Villeneuve.
The Girl Who Owned a Bear by L. Frank Baum. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Girl Who Owned a Bear by L. Frank Baum. Mama had gone downtown to shop. She had asked Nora to look after Jane Gladys, and Nora promised she would, but it was her afternoon for polishing the silver, so she stayed in the pantry and left Jane Gladys to amuse herself alone in the big sitting room upstairs. The little girl did not mind being alone, for she was working on her first piece of embroidery, a sofa pillow for Papa's birthday present. so she crept into the big bay window and curled herself up on the broad sill while she bent her brown head over her work. Soon the door opened and closed again quietly. Jane Gladys thought it was Nora, so she didn't look up until she had taken a couple more stitches on a forget-me-not. Then she raised her eyes and was astonished to find a strange man in the middle of the room, who regarded her earnestly. He was short and fat, and seemed to be breathing heavily from his climb up the stairs. He held a work silk hat in one hand, and underneath his other elbow was tucked a good-sized book. He was dressed in a black suit that looked old and rather shabby, and his head was bald upon the top. "Excuse me," he said, while the child gazed at him in solemn surprise. "Are you Jane Gladys Brown?" "Yes, sir," she answered. Very good indeed," he remarked with a queer sort of smile. "I've had quite a hunt to find you, but I've succeeded at last." "How did you get in?" inquired Jane Gladys with a growing distrust of her visitor. "That is a secret," he said mysteriously. This was enough to put the girl on her guard. She looked at the man, and the man looked at her, and both looks were grave and somewhat anxious. "What do you want?" she asked, straightening herself up with a dignified air. "Ah, now we are coming to business," said the man briskly. "I am going to be quite frank with you. To begin with, your father has abused me in a most ungentlemanly manner." Jane Gladys got off the window-sill and pointed her small finger at the door. "Leave this room immediately," she cried, her voice trembling with indignation. "My papa is the best man in the world. He never abused anybody." "Allow me to explain, please," said the visitor, without paying any attention to her request to go away. "Your father may be very kind to you, for you are his little girl, you know. But when he's downtown in his office, he's inclined to be rather severe, especially on book agents. Now, I called on him the other day and asked him to buy the complete works of Peter Smith, and what do you suppose he did?" She said nothing. "Why," continued the man with growing excitement, "he ordered me from his office, and had me put out of the building by the janitor. What do you think of such treatment as that from the best papa in the world, eh?" "I think he was quite right," said Jane Gladys. "Oh, you do? Well," said the man, "I resolved to be revenge for the insult. So, as your father is big and strong and a dangerous man, I have decided to be revenged upon his little girl." Jane Gladys shivered. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to present you with this book," he answered, taking it from under his arm. Then he sat down on the edge of a chair, placed his hat on the rug, and drew a fountain pen from his vest pocket. "I'll write your name in it," said he. "How do you spell Gladys?" "Gladys," she replied. "Thank you. Now this," he continued, rising and handing her the book with a bow, "is my revenge for your father's treatment of me. Perhaps he'll be sorry he didn't buy the complete works of Peter Smith. Good-bye, my dear." He walked to the door, gave her another bow, and left the room, and Jane Gladys could see that he was laughing to himself as if very much amused. When the door had closed behind the queer little man, the child sat down in the window again and glanced at the book. It had a red and yellow cover, and the word "Thingamajigs" was across the front in big letters. Then she opened it curiously and saw her name written in black letters upon the first white leaf. "He was a funny little man," she said to herself thoughtfully. She turned the next leaf and saw a big picture of a clown, dressed in green and red and yellow, and having a very white face with 3 cornered spots of red on each cheek and over the eyes. While she looked at this, the book trembled in her hands, the leaf crackled and creaked, and suddenly the clown jumped out of it and stood upon the floor beside her, becoming instantly as big as any ordinary clown. After stretching his arms and legs and yawning in a rather impolite manner, he gave a silly chuckle and said, "You didn't expect anything of this sort, did you?" he asked, leering at her in clown fashion. Then he turned around to take a look at the room, and Jane Gladys laughed in spite of her astonishment. "What amuses you?" demanded the clown. "Why, the back of you is all white," cried the girl. "You're only a clown in front of you." "Quite likely," he returned in an annoyed tone. "The artist made a front view of me. He wasn't expected to make the back of me, for that was against the page of the book." "But it makes you look so funny," said Jane Gladys, laughing until her eyes were moist with tears. The clown looked sulky and sat down upon a chair so she couldn't see his back. "I'm not the only thing in the book," he remarked crossly. This reminded her to turn another page, and she had scarcely noted that it contained the picture of a monkey when the animal sprang from the book with a great crumpling of paper and landed upon the window-seat beside her. chattered the creature, springing to the girl's shoulder and then to the center table. "This is great fun! Now I can be a real monkey instead of a picture of one!" "Real monkeys can't talk," said Jane Gladys reprovingly. "How do you know? Have you ever been one yourself?" inquired the animal, and then he laughed loudly, and the clown laughed too, as if he enjoyed the remark. The girl was quite bewildered by this time. She thoughtlessly turned another leaf, and before she had time to look twice, a gray donkey leapt from the book and stumbled from the window-seat to the floor with a great clatter. "You're clumsy enough, I'm sure," said the child indignantly, for the beast had nearly upset her. "Clumsy? And why not?" demanded the donkey with an angry voice. "If the fool artist had drawn you out of perspective as he did me, I guess you'd be clumsy yourself." "What's wrong with you?" asked Jane Gladys. "My front and rear legs on the left side are nearly 6 inches too short. That's what's the matter. If that artist didn't know how to draw properly, why did he try to make a donkey at all?" "I don't know," replied the child, seeing an answer was expected. "I can hardly stand up," grumbled the donkey, "and the least little thing will topple me over." "Don't mind that," said the monkey, making a spring at the chandelier and swinging from it by his tail until Jane Gladys feared he would knock all the globes off. "The same artist has made my ears as big as that clown's, and everyone knows a monkey hasn't any ears to speak of, much less to draw." "He should be prosecuted," remarked the clown gloomily. "I haven't any back." Jane Gladys looked from one to the other with a puzzled expression upon her sweet face, and turned another page of the book. Swift as a flash there sprang over her shoulder a tawny spotted leopard, which landed upon the back of a big leather armchair and turned upon the others with a fierce movement. The monkey climbed to the top of the chandelier and chattered with fright. The donkey tried to run and straightway tipped over on his left side. The clown grew paler than ever, but he sat still in his chair and gave a low whistle of surprise. The leopard crouched upon the back of the chair, lashed his tail from side to side, and glared at all of them by turns, including Jane Gladys. "Which of us are you going to attack first?" asked the donkey, trying hard to get upon his feet again. "I can't attack any of you," snarled the leopard. "The artist made my mouth shut, so I haven't any teeth, and he forgot to make my claws. But I'm a frightful-looking creature, nevertheless, am I not?" "Oh, yes," said the clown indifferently. "I suppose you're frightful-looking enough, but if you have no teeth nor claws, we don't mind your looks at all." This so annoyed the leopard that he growled horribly, and the monkey laughed at him. Just then the book slipped from the girl's lap, and as she made a movement to catch it, one of the pages near the back opened wide. She caught a glimpse of a fierce grizzly bear looking at her from the page, and quickly threw the book from her. It fell with a crash in the middle of the room, but beside it stood the great grizzly, who had wrenched himself from the page before the book closed. "Now," cried the leopard from his perch, "you'd better look out for yourselves. You can't laugh at him as you did me. The bear has both claws and teeth." "Indeed I have," said the bear in a low, deep, growling voice, "and I know how to use them, too. If you read in that book, you'll find I'm described as a horrible, cruel, and remorseless grizzly, whose only business in life is to eat up little girls, shoes, dresses, ribbons, and all. And then the author says I smack my lips and glory in my wickedness." "That's awful," said the donkey, sitting upon his haunches and shaking his head sadly. "What do you suppose possessed the author to make you so hungry for girls? Do you eat animals also?" "The author does not mention my eating anything but little girls," replied the bear. "Very good," remarked the clown, drawing a long breath of relief. "You may begin eating Jane Gladys as soon as you wish. She laughed because I had no back." "And she laughed because my legs are out of perspective," brayed the donkey. "But you also deserve to be eaten," screamed the leopard from the back of the leather chair, "for you laughed and poked fun at me because I have no claws nor teeth. Don't you suppose, Mr. Grizzly, you could manage to eat a clown, a donkey, and a monkey after you finished the girl?" "Perhaps so, and a leopard into the bargain," growled the bear. "It will depend on how hungry I am, but I must begin on the little girl first because the author says I prefer girls to anything." Jane Gladys was much frightened on hearing this conversation, and she began to realize what the man meant when he said he gave her the book to be revenged. Surely Papa would be sorry he hadn't bought the complete works of Peter Smith when he came home and found his little girl eaten up by a grizzly bear, shoes, dress, ribbons, and all. The bear stood up and balanced himself on his rear legs. "This is the way I look in the book," he said. "Now watch me eat the little girl." He advanced slowly toward Jane Gladys, and the monkey, the leopard, the donkey, and the clown all stood around in a circle and watched the bear with much interest. But before the grizzly reached her, the child had a sudden thought, and cried out, "Stop! You mustn't eat me. It would be wrong." "Why?" asked the bear in surprise. "Because I own you. You're my private property," she answered. "I don't see how you make that out," said the bear in a disappointed tone. "Why, the book was given to me. My name's on the front leaf, and you belong by rights in the book, so you mustn't dare to eat your owner." The grizzly hesitated. "Can any of you read?" he asked. "I can," said the clown. "Then see if she speaks the truth. Is her name really in the book?" The clown picked it up and looked at the name. "It is," said he. "Jane Gladys Brown, and written quite plainly in big letters." The bear sighed. "Then, of course, I can't eat her," he decided. "That author is as disappointing as most authors are." "But he's not as bad as the artist," exclaimed the donkey, who was still trying to stand up straight. "The fault lies with yourselves," said Jane Gladys severely. "Why didn't you stay in the book where you were put?" The animals looked at each other in a foolish way, and the clown blushed under his white paint. "Really," began the bear, and then he stopped short. The doorbell rang loudly. "It's Mamma!" cried Jane Gladys, springing to her feet. "She's come home at last! Now, you stupid creatures—" But she was interrupted by them all making a rush for the book. There was a swish and a whir and a rustling of leaves, and an instant later the book lay upon the floor, looking just like any other book, while Jane Gladys's strange companions had all disappeared. This story should teach us to think quickly and clearly upon all occasions, for had Jane Gladys not remembered that she owned the bear, he probably would have eaten her before the bell rang. End of The Girl Who Owned a Bear by L. Frank Baum. Read by Troy Bond. The Glass Dog by L. Frank Baum. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Glass Dog by L. Frank Baum. An accomplished wizard once lived on the top floor of a tenement house, and passed his time in thoughtful study and studious thought. What he didn't know about wizardry was hardly worth knowing, for he possessed all the books and recipes of all the wizards who had lived before him, and, moreover, he had invented several wizard mints himself. This admirable person would have been completely happy but for the numerous interruptions to his studies caused by folk who came to consult him about their troubles, in which he was not interested, and by the loud knocks of the iceman, the milkman, the baker's boy, the laundryman, and the peanut woman. He never dealt with any of these people, but they rapped at his door every day to see him about this or that or try to sell him their wares. Just when he was most deeply interested in his books or engaged in watching the bubbling of a cauldron, there would come a knock at his door, and after sending the intruder away, he always found that he had lost his train of thought or ruined his compound. At length these interruptions aroused his anger, and he decided he must have a dog to keep people away from his door. He didn't know where to find a dog, but in the next room lived a poor glass-blower with whom he had a slight acquaintance. So he went into the man's apartment and asked, "Where can I find a dog?" "What sort of a dog?" inquired the glass-blower. "A good dog. One that will bark at people and drive them away. One that will be no trouble to keep and won't expect to be fed. One that has no fleas and is neat in his habits. One that will obey me when I speak to him. In short, a good dog," said the wizard. "Such a dog is hard to find," returned the glass-blower, who was busy making a blue glass flower-pot with a pink glass rose-bush in it, having green glass leaves and yellow glass roses. The wizard watched him thoughtfully. "Why cannot you blow me a dog out of glass?" he asked presently. "I can," declared the glass-blower, "but it would not bark at people, you know." "Oh, I'll fix that easily enough," replied the other. "If I could not make a glass dog bark, I would be a mighty poor wizard." "Very well, if you can use a glass dog, I'll be pleased to blow one for you, only you must pay for my work." "Certainly," agreed the wizard, "but I have none of that horrid stuff you call money. You must take some of my wares in exchange." The glass-blower considered the matter for a moment. "Could you give me something to cure my rheumatism?" he asked. "Oh, yes, easily." "Then it's a bargain. I shall start the dog at once. What color of glass shall I use?" "Pink is a pretty color," said the wizard. "And it's unusual for a dog, isn't it?" "Very," answered the glass-blower, "but it shall be pink." So the wizard went back to his studies, and the glass-blower began to make the dog. Next morning he entered the wizard's room with the glass dog under his arm, and set it carefully upon the table. It was a beautiful pink in color, with a fine coat of spun glass, and about its neck was twisted a blue glass ribbon. Its eyes were specks of black glass, and sparkled intelligently, as do many of the glass eyes worn by men. The wizard expressed himself pleased with the glass-blower's skill, and at once handed him a small vial. "This will cure your rheumatism," he said. "But the vial is empty," protested the glass-blower. "Oh, no, there is one drop of liquid in it," was the wizard's reply. "Will one drop cure my rheumatism?" inquired the glass blower in wonder. "Most certainly. That is a marvelous remedy. The one drop contained in the vial will cure instantly any kind of disease ever known to humanity. Therefore it is especially good for rheumatism. But guard it well, for it is the only drop of its kind in the world, and I've forgotten the recipe." "Thank you," said the glass blower, and went back to his room. Then the wizard cast a wizzy spell and mumbled several very learned words in the wizardese language over the glass dog, whereupon the little animal first wagged its tail from side to side, then winked his left eye knowingly, and at last began barking in a most frightful manner, that is, when you stop to consider the noise came from a pink glass dog. There is something almost astonishing in the magic arts of wizards, unless of course you know how to do the things yourself, when you are not expected to be surprised at them. The wizard was as delighted as a schoolteacher at the success of his spell, although he was not astonished. Immediately he placed the dog outside his door, where it would bark at anyone who dared knock and so disturb the studies of its master. The glass blower, on returning to his room, decided not to use the one drop of wizard cure-all just then. "My rheumatism is better today," he reflected, "and I will be wise to save the medicine for a time when I am very ill, when it will be of more service to me." So he placed the vial in his cupboard and went to work blowing more roses out of glass. Presently he happened to think the medicine might not keep, so he started to ask the wizard about it, but when he reached the door the glass dog barked so fiercely that he dared not knock, and returned in great haste to his own room. Indeed, the poor man was quite upset at so unfriendly a reception from the dog he had himself so carefully and skilfully made. The next morning, as he read his newspaper, he noticed an article stating that the beautiful Miss Midas, the richest young lady in town, was very ill, and the doctors had given up hope of her recovery. The glass blower, although miserably poor, hard-working, and homely of feature, was a man of ideas. He suddenly recollected his precious medicine, and determined to use it to better advantage than relieving his own ills. He dressed himself in his best clothes, brushed his hair and combed his whiskers, washed his hands and tied his necktie, blackened his shoes and sponged his vest, and then put the vial of magic cure-all in his pocket. Next he locked his door, went downstairs, and walked through the streets to the grand mansion where the wealthy Miss Midas resided. The butler opened the door and said, "No soap, no chromos, no vegetables, no hair oil, no books, no baking powder. My young lady is dying, and we're well supplied for the funeral." The glass blower was grieved at being taken for a peddler. "My friend," he began proudly, but the butler interrupted him, saying, "No tombstones either. There's a family graveyard, and the monument's built." "The graveyard won't be needed if you will permit me to speak," said the glass blower. "No doctors, sir. They've given up my young lady, and she's given up the doctors," continued the butler calmly. "I'm no doctor," returned the glass blower. "Nor are the others. But what is your errand?" "I call to cure your young lady by means of a magical compound." "Step in, please, and take a seat in the hall. I'll speak to the housekeeper," said the butler more politely. So he spoke to the housekeeper, and the housekeeper mentioned the matter to the steward, and the steward consulted the chef, and the chef kissed the lady's maid and sent her to see the stranger. Thus are the very wealthy hedged around with ceremony, even when dying. When the lady's maid heard from the glass blower that he had a medicine which would cure her mistress, she said, "I'm glad you came." "But," said he, "if I restore your mistress to health, she must marry me." "I'll make inquiries and see if she's willing," answered the maid, and went at once to consult Miss Midas. The young lady did not hesitate an instant. "I'd marry any old thing rather than die," she cried. "Bring him here at once." So the glass blower came, poured the magic drop into a little water, gave it to the patient, and the next minute Miss Midas was as well as she had ever been in her life. "Dear me," she exclaimed, "I've an engagement at the Fritters' reception tonight. Bring me my pearl-colored silk, Marie, and I will begin my toilet at once. And don't forget to cancel the order for the funeral flowers and your morning gown." "But, Miss Midas," remonstrated the glass blower, who stood by, "you promised to marry me if I cured you." "I know," said the young lady, "but we must have time to make proper announcement in the society papers and have the wedding cards engraved. Call tomorrow and we'll talk it over." The glass blower had not impressed her favorably as a husband, and she was glad to find an excuse for getting rid of him for a time, and she did not want to miss the Fritters' reception. Yet the man went home filled with joy, for he thought his stratagem had succeeded, and he was about to marry a rich wife who would keep him in luxury forever afterward. The first thing he did on reaching his room was to smash his glass-blowing tools and throw them out the window. He then sat down to figure out ways of spending his wife's money. The following day he called upon Miss Midas, who was reading a novel and eating chocolate creams as happily as if she had never been ill in her life. "Where did you get the magic compound that cured me?" she asked. "From a learned wizard," said he, and then, thinking it would interest her, he told how he had made the glass dog for the wizard and how it barked and kept everybody from bothering him. "How delightful!" she said. "I've always wanted a glass dog that could bark." "But there is only one in the world," he answered, "and it belongs to the wizard." "You must buy it for me," said the lady. "The wizard cares nothing for money," replied the glass blower. "Then you must steal it for me," she retorted. "I can never live happily another day unless I have a glass dog that can bark." The glass blower was much distressed at this, but said he would see what he could do, for a man should always try to please his wife, and Miss Midas had promised to marry him within a week. On his way home he purchased a heavy sack, and when he passed the wizard's door and the pink glass dog ran out to bark at him, he threw the sack over the dog, tied the opening with a piece of twine, and carried him away to his own room. The next day he sent the sack by a messenger boy to Miss Midas with his compliments, and later in the afternoon he called upon her in person, feeling quite sure he would be received with gratitude for stealing the dog she so greatly desired. But when he came to the door and the butler opened it, what was his amazement to see the glass dog rush out and begin barking at him furiously. "Call off your dog!" he shouted in terror. "I can't, sir," answered the butler. "My young lady has ordered the glass dog to bark whenever you call here. You'd best look out, sir," he added, "for if it bites you, you may have glassophobia." This so frightened the poor glass blower that he went away hurriedly, but he stopped at a drug-store and put his last dime in the telephone box so he could call Miss Midas without being bitten by the dog. "Give me Pelf 6742, he called. "Hello, what is it?" said a voice. "I want to speak with Miss Midas," said the glass blower. Presently a sweet voice said, "This is Miss Midas. What is it?" "Why have you treated me so cruelly and set the glass dog on me?" asked the poor fellow. "Well, to tell the truth," said the lady, "I don't like your looks. Your cheeks are pale and baggy, your hair is coarse and long, your eyes are small and red, your hands are big and rough, and you are bow-legged." "But I can't help my looks," pleaded the glass blower, "and you really promised to marry me." "If you were better looking, I'd keep my promise," she returned. "But, under the circumstances, you are no fit mate for me, and unless you keep away from my mansion, I shall set my glass dog on you." Then she dropped the phone and would have nothing more to say. The miserable glass blower went home with a heart bursting with disappointment and began tying a rope to the bedpost by which to hang himself. Someone knocked at the door, and upon opening it, he saw the wizard. "I've lost my dog," he announced. "Have you indeed?" replied the glass blower, tying a knot in the rope. "Yes, someone has stolen him." "That's too bad," declared the glass blower indifferently. "You must make me another," said the wizard. "But I cannot, I've thrown away my tools." "Then what shall I do?" asked the wizard. "I do not know, unless you offer a reward for the dog." "But I have no money," said the wizard. "Offer some of your compounds, then," suggested the glass blower, who was making a noose in the rope for his head to go through. "The only thing I can spare," replied the wizard thoughtfully, "is a beauty powder." "What?" cried the glass blower, throwing down the rope. "Have you really such a thing?" "Yes, indeed. Whoever takes the powder will become the most beautiful person in the world." "If you will offer that as a reward," said the glass blower eagerly, "I'll try to find the dog for you, for above everything else I long to be beautiful." "But I warn you the beauty will only be skin deep," said the wizard. "That's all right," replied the happy glass blower. "When I lose my skin, I shan't care to remain beautiful." "Then tell me where to find my dog, and you shall have the powder," promised the wizard. So the glass blower went out and pretended to search, and by he returned and said, "I've discovered the dog. You will find him in the mansion of Miss Midas." The wizard went at once to see if this were true, and, sure enough, the glass dog ran out and began barking at him. Then the wizard spread out his hands and chanted a magic spell which sent the dog fast asleep, when he picked him up and carried him to his own room on the top floor of the tenement house. Afterward he carried the beauty powder to the glass blower as a reward, and the fellow immediately swallowed it and became the most beautiful man in the world. The next time he called upon Miss Midas there was no dog to bark at him, and when the young lady saw him she fell in love with his beauty at once. "If only you were a count or a prince," she sighed, "I'd willingly marry you." "But I am a prince," he answered, "the prince of dog-blowers." "Ah," said she, "then if you are willing to accept an allowance of $4 a week, I'll order the wedding cards engraved." The man hesitated, but when he thought of the rope hanging from his bedpost, he consented to the terms. So they were married, and the bride was very jealous of her husband's beauty and led him a dog's life. so he managed to get into debt and made her miserable in turn. As for the glass dog, the wizard set him barking again by means of his wizardness and put him outside his door. I suppose he is there yet, and I'm rather sorry, for I should like to consult the wizard about the moral to this story. End of The Glass Dog by L. Frank Baum. Read by Troy Bond.
Gold Tree and Silver Tree by Joseph Jacobs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time there was a king who had a wife whose name was Silver Tree, and a daughter whose name was Gold Tree. On a certain day of days, Gold Tree and Silver Tree went to a glen where there was a well, and in it there was a trout. Said Silver Tree, "Trouty, bonny little fellow, am I not the most beautiful queen in the world?" "Oh, indeed you are not." "Who then?" "Why, Gold Tree, your daughter." Silver Tree went home blind with rage. She lay down on the bed and vowed she would never be well until she could get her heart and the liver of Gold Tree, her daughter, to eat. At nightfall the king came home, and it was told him that Silver Tree, his wife, was very ill. He went where she was and asked her what was wrong with her. "Oh, only a thing which you may heal if you like." "Oh, indeed there is nothing at all which I could do for you that I would not do." "If I get the heart and liver of Gold Tree, my daughter, to eat, I shall be well." Now it happened about this time that the son of a great king had come from abroad to ask Gold Tree for marrying. The king now agreed to this, and they went abroad. The king then went and sent his lads to the hunting hill for a he-goat, and he gave its heart and its liver to his wife to eat, and she rose well and healthy. A year after this, Silver Tree went to the glen where there was the well in which there was the trout. "Trouty, bonny little fellow," said she, "am I not the most beautiful queen in the world?" "Oh, indeed you are not." "Who then?" "Why, Gold Tree, your daughter." "Oh, well, it is a long since she was living. It is a year since I ate her heart and liver." "Oh, indeed she is not dead. She is married to a great prince abroad." Silver Tree went home and begged the king to put the longship in order, and said, "I am going to see my dear Gold Tree, for it is so long since I saw her." The longship was put in order, and they went away. It was Silver Tree herself that was at the helm, and she steered the ship so well that they were not long at all before they arrived. The prince was out hunting on the hills. Gold Tree knew the longship of her father coming. "Oh," she said to the servants, "my mother is coming, and she will kill me." "She shall not kill you at all. We will lock you in a room where she cannot get near you." And this was how it was done. And when Silver Tree came ashore, she began to cry out, "Come to meet your own mother when she comes to see you." Gold Tree said that she could not, that she was locked in the room, and that she could not get out of it. "Will you not put out," said Silver Tree, "your little finger through the keyhole, so that your own mother may give a kiss to it?" She put out her little finger, and Silver Tree went and put a poisoned stab in it, and Gold Tree fell dead. When the prince came home and found Gold Tree dead, he was in great sorrow, and when he saw how beautiful she was, he did not bury her at all, but he locked her in a room where nobody would get near her. In the course of time he married again, and the whole house was under the hand of this wife but one room, and he himself always kept the key of that room. On a certain day of the days he forgot to take the key with him, and the second wife got into the room. What did she see there but the most beautiful woman that she ever saw? She began to turn and try to wake her, and she noticed the poisoned stab in her finger. She took the stab out, and Gold Tree rose, alive, as beautiful as she ever was. At the fall of night the prince came home from the hunting hill, looking very downcast. "What gift," said his wife, "would you give me that I could make you laugh?" "Oh, indeed, nothing could make me laugh, except Gold Tree were to come alive again." "Well, you'll find her alive down there in the room." When the prince saw Gold Tree alive, he made great rejoicings, and he began to kiss her and kiss her and kiss her. Said the second wife, "Since she is the first one you had, it is better for you to stick to her, and I will go away." "Oh, indeed you shall not go away, for I shall have both of you." At the end of the year, Silver Tree went to the glen, where there was the well, in which there was the trout. "Trouty, bonny little fellow," said she, "am I not the most beautiful queen in the world?" "Oh, indeed you are not." "Who then?" "Why, Gold Tree, your daughter." "Oh, well, she is not alive. It is a year since I put the poisoned stab into her finger." "Oh, indeed she is not dead at all, at all." Silver Tree went home and begged the king to put the longship in order, for that she was going to see her dear Gold Tree, as it was so long since she saw her. The longship was put in order, and they went away. It was Silver Tree herself that was at the helm, and she steered the ship so well that they were not long at all before they arrived. The prince was out hunting on the hills. Gold Tree knew her father's ship coming. "Oh," said she, "my mother is coming, and she will kill me." "Not at all," said the second wife. "We will go down to meet her." Silver Tree came ashore. "Come down, Gold Tree, love," said she, "for your own mother has come to you with a precious drink." "It is a custom in this country," said the second wife, "that the person who offers a drink takes a draught out of it first." Silver Tree put her mouth to it, and the second wife went and struck it so that some of it went down her throat, and she fell dead. They had only to carry her home, a dead corpse, and bury her. The prince and his two wives were long alive after this, pleased and peaceful. I left them there. That's the end of Gold Tree and Silver Tree by Joseph Jacob. Read by Teresa Elliott.
The Lion and the Hare by W. Crook and W. H. D. Rouse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Once upon a time there was a lion who used daily to devour one of the beasts of the forest. They had to come up one after another when called for. At last it came to the hare's turn to be eaten, and he did not want to be eaten at all. He lingered and he dallied, and when at last he plucked up the courage to come, he was very late. The lion, when he saw the hare coming, bounded towards him. The hare said, "Uncle Lion, I know I am late, and you have cause to be angry, but really it is not my fault. There is another lion in our part of the jungle, and he says that he is master, and you are nobody. In fact, when I showed him that I positively would come to you, he was very angry." "Ah," said the lion, roaring. "Who says he is my master? Show him to me. I'll teach him who rules the forest." "Come along then," said the hare. They went a long way, until they came to a well. The hare looked down into the well. "He was here just now," said he. The lion looked in, and at the bottom he saw what looked like a lion in the water. He shook his mane. The other lion shook his mane. He roared. The echo of a roar came up from the bottom of the well. "Let me get at him," roared the lion. In he jumped. Splash! Nothing more was ever heard of that lion, and the beasts of the forest were glad to be left in peace. They put their heads together and composed a verse of poetry, which is always sung in that forest on Sundays. The hare is small, but by his wit he now has got the best of it. By folly down the lion fell, and lost his life within the well. End of The Lion and the Hare by W. Crook and W. H. D. Rouse. Read by Aidan Brack.
The Magic Fiddle from the Oak Tree Fairy Book by Clifton Johnson. Read by Maria Grazia Tundo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A farmer once had a servant who worked for him 3 years without being paid any wages. The servant did his work well and faithfully, and was the first of the farmer's help to get up in the morning and the last to go to bed at night. If there was any hard work to be done which no one else would do, he was always ready to undertake it. He never made any complaint, and never failed to be good-natured and contented. But at last it came into the man's head that he wouldn't continue without pay any longer. So he went to his master and said, "I have worked hard for you a long time, and now I think I should have some money for my labor." The farmer was miserly and not altogether honest, and as he knew that his man was very simple-hearted, he took out his purse and gave him 3 pence. "There is a penny," said he, "for each year you have served me." The servant thought 3 pence was a great deal of money to have, and he said to himself, "Why should I work here any longer? I can now travel into the wide world and make myself merry." Then, with his money jingling in his pocket, he set out roaming over hill and valley. As he tramped singing along the road, a little dwarf hopped out of a wayside bush and asked, "What makes you so happy, sir?" "Why, what should make me downhearted?" said the man. "I am sound in health and rich in purse. I have saved up the pay for 3 years' work, and have it all safe in my pocket." "How much may that come to?" inquired the dwarf. "Full 3 pence," replied the servant. "Listen," said the dwarf, "I wish you would give the 3 pence to me. I am very poor." When the man heard this, he was so sorry for the dwarf that he gave him the 3 pence, and the little dwarf said, "As you've been so kind to me, I will grant any wish that you may care to make. So choose whatever you like." "Ah," said the servant, "you are a wonder worker, I see," and greatly rejoiced at his good luck. He paused to think what he most wanted. "I like many things better than money," said he. "Now, if you could give me a fiddle that would set everyone dancing who hears me play on it, that would please me more than anything else I can think of." "All right," said the dwarf, "you can have what you ask for." And out of a bag he carried, he pulled a fiddle and bow and handed them to his companion. "Heart alive! What more can one desire?" said the servant. Then the dwarf went his way, and the hired man walked on singing as before. But he hadn't gone far when an old man called to him from a roadside field. The old man had an axe in his hands, and was standing under a great oak tree that he had begun to cut down. "This work is too hard for me," said the old man, "but a stout fellow like you would make nothing of it, and if you will finish chopping through this tree trunk, I will pay you 5 shillings. "Give me the axe," said the servant. "I am quite willing to earn a little money, for mine is all gone." And he threw off his coat and went to work. By and by the oak crashed to the ground. "There," said the servant, "now I'll take my 5 shillings and be stepping along." "I did not think you could do the work so soon, or I wouldn't have offered you so much," said the old man. "Well, that is no fault of mine," the servant replied. "But 5 shillings is more than the work is worth," argued the old man. "Here, I will give you 3 shillings, and that is a great plenty." "No, I will take nothing less than what you agreed to give me in the first place," the servant declared. "Then you will not get anything," said the other. "We will see about that," was the servant's response. And he took up his fiddle and began playing, and the old man began to dance. "How is this?" the old man cried. "Is that fiddle enchanted?" "Yes," said the servant. "Then, for heaven's sake, my good fellow, play no more," shouted the old man. "I don't want to dance. My bones are too stiff for me to be springing about like this. Master, master, do let the fiddle alone." "You don't like dancing, huh?" laughed the servant. "Well, it's good enough for you after treating me so meanly." And he played away more briskly than ever. Have pity, begged the old man, "and I will give you your money." So the servant stopped fiddling. Then the old man handed over the 5 shillings. But he was so angry that as soon as he had rubbed his aching joints, he hurried to the town, muttering as he went, "The miserable fiddler! Just wait, I will get even with him." As soon as he reached the town, he complained to the constables that he had been robbed. "You will know the rascal who robbed me easily enough," said the old man, "for he is always singing, and he carries a violin under his arm." The constables set off at once in search of the rogue, and presently they caught him and brought him before the court to be tried. "That is he," said the old man. "That is the very fellow who stole my 5 shillings." "No," said the servant, "I did not steal. You gave me the money for playing a tune to you on my fiddle." "What?" exclaimed the judge. 5 shillings for a tune on a fiddle? That's not at all likely. I fear you are a liar as well as a thief." "I speak the truth," said the servant. "Heaven defend us!" screamed the old man. "His lies are as thick as flies on the wall. He stole my money, and you can't believe a word he says." "Prisoner," said the judge, "you deserve hanging." Then the judge turned to the officers and said, "Take the 5 shillings from him and give them to the old man, and after that you may conduct the culprit to the gallows." So the officers took away the servant's money and marched him off to the gallows, while the old man cried after him, "You vagabond, you dog of a fiddler, now you will get your just deserts." A crowd followed the culprit to the place of execution, and the officers were about to put the rope around his neck, when he said to the judge, "My lord, grant me one last request." "What is it?" asked the judge. "Only this," replied the servant, "that I may play on my fiddle once more." "Very well," replied the judge, "play away." "Oh, no, no," shouted the old man, "for mercy's sake don't let him play his fiddle." But the judge said, "It's only for this once. He will soon have done." "Then bind me fast, oh, bind me fast before he begins," cried the old man. The servant wasted no time in starting a tune, and at the first scrape all the people began to wag their heads, his accuser and the judge, the officers, the jailer, the hangman, and everyone else who was within hearing. They couldn't help themselves. At the second scrape they all lifted their legs, and the hangman let go his hold of the honest servant to make ready to dance. At the third scrape they one and all leaped into the air and began to caper about, old and young, fat and lean, danced as hard as they could. Even the dogs got up on their hind legs and pranced about with the rest. The dancing was merry and pleasant enough at first, but when it had gone on for a while and there seemed to be no end to the playing or leaping, the people began to cry out for the servant to stop fiddling. But that he would not do, till the judge had promised he should not be hanged, and the old man had given back to him his 5 shillings. So the judge promised, and the old man handed over the money. Then the servant tucked the fiddle under his arm and started off again on his travels, and the people who had been dancing around the gallows heard him singing as he walked down the street out of the town. End of The Magic Fiddle from the Oak Tree Fairy Book by Clifton Johnson, read by Maria Grazia Tundo.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Magic Jar by Juliana Horatia Gaddy Ewing. There was once a young fellow whom fortune had blessed with a good mother, a clever head, and a strong body. But beyond this, she had not much favored him, and though able and willing to work, he had often little to do and less to eat. But his mother had taught him to be contented with his own lot and to feel for others. Moreover, from her he inherited a great love for flowers. One day, when his pockets were emptiest, a fair was held in the neighboring town, and he must needs go as well as the rest, though he had no money to spend. But he stuck a buttercup in his cap, for which he had nothing to pay, and strode along as merry as the most. Towards evening some of the merrymakers became riotous, and a party of them fell upon an old Jew who was keeping a stall of glass and china, and would smash his stock. Now as the Jew stood before his booth, beseeching them to spare his property, up came the strong young man with the flower still unwithered in his cap, and he took the old Jew's part and defended him. For from childhood his motherhood had taught him to feel for others. So those who would have ill-treated the old Jew now moved off, and the young man stayed with him until he had packed up his wares. Then the Jew turned towards him and said, "My son, he who delivers the oppressed and has respect unto the aged has need of no reward, for the blessing of him that blesseth is about him. Nevertheless, that I may not seem ungrateful, choose, I pray thee, one of these china jars, and take it to thee for thine own. If thou shalt choose well, it may be of more use to thee than presently appears." Thereupon the young man examined the jars, which were highly ornamented with many figures and devices, but he chose one that was comparatively plain. Only it had a bunch of flowers painted on the front, round which was a pretty device in spots or circles of gold. Then said the Jew, "My son, why have you chosen this jar when there are others so much finer?" The young man said, "Because the flowers please me, and I have a love for flowers." Then said the Jew, "Happy is he whose tastes are simple. Moreover, herein is a rare wisdom, and thou hast gained that which is the most valuable of my possessions. This jar has properties which I will further explain to thee. It was given to me by a wise woman, subject to this condition, that I must expose it for sale from sunrise to sunset at the yearly fair. When I understood this, I took counsel with myself how I should preserve it, and I bought other china jars of more apparent value, and marked them all with the same price. For I said within myself, there is no man who does not desire to get as much as he can for his money, therefore, from its contrast with these others, my jar is safe. And it was even so, for truly many have desired to buy the jar because of the delicate beauty of the flowers, if I would have sold it for less than the others, which seemed more valuable. Many times it has been almost gone, but when I have shown the others at the same price, my customers have reviled me, saying, Dog of a Jew, dost thou ask as much for this as these others which are manifestly worth double? They have either departed cursing me and taking nothing, or they have bought one of the more richly decorated jars at the same price. For verily in most men the spirit of covetousness is stronger than the love of beauty, and they rather desire to get much for their money than to obtain that which is suitable and convenient. But in thee, O young man, I have beheld a rare wisdom, to choose that which is good in thine eyes, and suitable to thy needs, rather than that which satisfieth the lust of overreaching. And lo, what have I so long kept from thousands has become thine. Then the young man wished to restore to the Jew the jar he valued so highly, and to choose another. But the Jew refused, saying, A gift cannot be recalled. Moreover, I will now explain to thee its uses. Within the jar lies a toad, whose spit is poison, but it will never spit at its master. Every evening thou must feed it with bread and milk, when it will fall asleep, and at sunrise in the morning it will awake and breathe heavily against the side of the jar, which will thus become warm. As it warms, the flowers will blossom out, and become real and full of perfume, and thou wilt be able to pluck them without diminishing their number. Moreover, these 12 round spots of gold will drop off, and become 12 gold pieces, which will be thine, and thus it will be every day. Only thou must thyself rise with the sun, and gather the flowers and the gold with thine own hands. Furthermore, when the jar cools, the flowers and gilding will be as before. Fare thee well. And even as he spoke, the Jew lifted the huge crate of china on to his back and disappeared among the crowd. All came about as the Jew had promised. As he had 12 gold pieces a day, the young man now wanted for nothing, besides which he had fresh flowers on his table all the year round. Now it is well said, Thy business is my business, and the business of all beside. For every man's affairs are his neighbor's property. Thus it came about that all those who lived near the young man were perplexed that he had such beautiful flowers in all seasons, and esteemed it as an injury to themselves that he should have them and give no explanation as to whence they came. At last it came to the ears of the king, and he also was disturbed, for he was curious and fond of prying into small matters, a taste which ill becomes those of high position. But the king had no child to succeed him, and he was always suspecting those about him of plotting to obtain the crown, and thus he came to be for ever prying into the affairs of his subjects. Now when he heard of the young man who had flowers on his table all the year round, he desired one of his officers to go and question him as to how he obtained them. But the young man contrived to evade his questions, and the matter was at rest for a while. Then the king sent another messenger, with orders to press the young man more closely, and because the young man disdained to tell a lie, he said, I get the flowers from yon china jar. Then the messenger returned and said to the king, The young man says that he gets the flowers from a certain china jar which stands in his room. Then said the king, Bring the contents of the jar hither to me. And the messenger turned and brought the toad. But when the king laid hold upon the toad, it spat in his face, and he was poisoned and died. Then the toad sat upon the king's mouth, and would not be enticed away, and every one feared to touch it because it spat poison. And they called the wise men of the council, and they performed certain rites to charm away the toad, and yet it would not go. But after 3 days, the master of the toad came to the palace, and without saying who he was, he desired to be permitted to try and get the toad from the corpse of the king. And when he was taken into the king's chamber, he stood and beckoned to the toad, saying, The person of the king and the bodies of the dead are sacred, wherefore come away. And the toad crawled from the king's face and came to him, and did not spit at him, and he put it back into the jar. Then said the wise men, There is no one so fit to succeed to the kingdom as this man is, both for wisdom of speech and for the power of command. And what they said pleased the people, and the young man was made king, and in due time he married an amiable and talented princess, and had children. And he ruled the kingdom well and wisely, and was beloved until his death. Now when, after the lapse of many years, he died, there was great grief among the people, and his body was laid out in his own room, and the people were permitted to come and look upon his face for the last time. And among the crowd there appeared an aged Jew, and he did not weep as did the others, but he came and stood by the bier, and gazed upon the face of the dead king in silence. And after a while he exclaimed and said, O wonderful spectacle! A man and not covetous, a ruler and not oppressive, contented in poverty, and moderate in wealth, elect of the people, and beloved to the end. And when he had said this, he again became silent, and stood as one astonished. And no one knew when he came in, nor perceived where he departed. But when they came to search for the china jar, it was gone, and could never afterwards be found.
The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Every afternoon, as they were coming from school, the children used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large, lovely garden with soft green grass. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars, and there were 12 peach trees that in the springtime broke out into delicate blossoms of pink and pearl, and in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. "How happy we are here!" they cried to each other. One day the giant came back. He had been to visit his friend the Cornish ogre, and stayed with him for 7 years. After the 7 years were over, he had said all that he had to say, for his conversation was limited, and he determined to return to his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in the garden. "What are you doing here?" he cried in a very gruff voice, and the children ran away. "My own garden is my own garden," said the giant, "and anyone can understand that, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself." So he built a high wall all around it, and put up a notice board. "Trespassers will be prosecuted." He was a very selfish giant. The poor children had now nowhere to play. They tried to play on the road, but the road was very dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander round the high wall when their lessons were over, and talk about the beautiful garden inside. "How happy we were there," they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant was it still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it, as there were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. "Spring has forgotten this garden," they cried, "so we will live here all the year round." The snow covered up the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. They invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared all day about the garden, and blew the chimney pots down. "This is a delightful spot," he said. "We must ask the hail on a visit." So the hail came. Every day for 3 hours he rattled on the roof of the castle till he broke most of the slates, and then he ran round and round the garden as fast as he could go. He was dressed in grey, and his breath was like ice. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant, as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden. "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the giant's garden she gave none. "He is too selfish," she said. So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears that he thought it must be the king's musicians passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window, but it was so long since he had heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him to be the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and a delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. "I believe the spring has come at last," said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall the children had crept in, and they were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see there was a little child. And the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they covered themselves with blossoms and were waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying around and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. It was a lovely scene, only in one corner it was still winter. It was the farthest corner of the garden, and in it was standing a little boy. He was so small he could not reach up to the branches of the tree, and he was wandering all round it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. "Climb up, little boy," said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could, but the boy was too tiny. And the giant's heart melted as he looked out. "How selfish I have been," he said. "Now I know why the spring could not come here. I will put that poor little boy on the top of that tree, and then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground for ever and ever." He was really very sorry for what he had done. So he crept downstairs and opened the front door quite softly, and went out into the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him up into the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossom, and the birds came and sang on it, and the little boy stretched out his 2 arms and flung them round the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back, and with them came the spring. "It is your garden now, little children," said the giant, and he took a great axe and knocked down the wall. And when the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him good-bye. "But where is your little companion?" he said. "The boy I put into the tree. The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him." "We don't know," answered the children. "He has gone away." "You must tell him to be sure and come here tomorrow," said the giant. But the children said that they did not know where he lived, and had never seen him before, and the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon when school was over, the children came and played with the giant, but the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all the children, yet he longed for his first little friend and often spoke of him. "How I would like to see him," he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about any more, so he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games, and admired his garden. "I have many beautiful flowers," he said, "but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all." One winter morning he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate the winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder, and looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree, quite covered with lovely white blossoms. Its branches were all golden, and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy, and out into the garden. He hastened across the grass, and came near to the child. And when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger, and he said, "Who hath dared to wound thee?" For on the palms of the child's hands were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were on the little feet. "Who hath dared to wound thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, that I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but these are the wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant. And a strange awe fell on him, and he knelt before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant and said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran in that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossoms. End of The Selfish Giant by Oscar Wilde. Read by Mary Beth Blackburn.
When Mother Fell Ill by Eleanor H. Porter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tom was 18 and was spending the long summer days behind the village store counter. Tom hoped to go to college in the fall. Carrie was 15. The long days found her oftenest down by the brook, reading. Carrie was a bit romantic, and the book was usually poetry. Robert and Rosamond, the twins, known to all their world as Rob and Rose, were 8. Existence for them meant play, food and sleep. To be sure, there were books and school, but those were in the remote past or dim future, together with winter, mittens and fires. It was summer now. Summer, and the two filled the hours with rollicking games and gleeful shouts, and incidentally their mother's work-basket with numerous torn pinafores and trousers. Behind everything, above everything, and beneath everything, with all-powerful hands and an all-wise brain, was Mother. There was Father, of course, but Father could not cook the meals, sweep the rooms, sew on buttons, find lost pencils, bathe bumped foreheads, and do countless other things. So thought Tom, Carrie, and the twins, that dreadful morning when Father came dolefully downstairs and said that Mother was sick. Mother sick? Tom stared blankly at the sugar bowl. Carrie fell limply into the nearest chair, and the twins began to cry softly. The next 36 hours were never forgotten by the Dudleys. The cool nook in the woods was deserted, and Carrie spent a hot, discouraged morning in the kitchen, sole mistress where before she had been an all-too-seldom helper. At noon, Mr. Dudley and Tom came home to partake of underdone potatoes and overdone meat. The twins, repressed and admonished into a state of hysterical nervousness, repaired directly after dinner to the attic. Half an hour later, a prolonged wail told that Rob had cut his finger severely with an old knife, and it was during the attendant excitement that Rose managed to fall the entire length of the attic stairs. At night, after a supper of soggy rolls and burnt omelette, Mr. Dudley sent an appealing telegram to Cousin Helen, and the next afternoon at 5 she came. Miss Helen Mortimer was pretty, sweet-tempered, and 25. The entire family fell captive to her first smile. There was a world of comfort and relief in her very presence, and in the way she said cheerily, "We shall do very well, I am sure. Carrie can attend to her mother, and I will take the helm downstairs." The doctor said that rest and quiet was what Mrs. Dudley most needed, so Carrie's task would be comparatively light, and with a stout woman to come twice a week for the heavy work downstairs, the household gave promise of being once more on a livable basis. It was at breakfast the next morning that the first cloud appeared on Miss Mortimer's horizon. It came in the shape of the crisply fried potatoes she was serving. The 4 children were eating late after their father had left. "Oh, Cousin Helen," began Tom in an annoyed manner. "I forgot to tell you, I don't like fried potatoes. I have baked ones." "Baked ones?" "Yes, Mother always baked them for me." "Oh, that's too bad. You can't eat them then. They hurt you." Tom laughed. "Hurt me? Not a bit of it. I don't like them, that's all. Never mind, you can do it tomorrow." When tomorrow came, Miss Mortimer had not forgotten. The big round dish was heaped with potatoes baked to a turn. "Thank you, I'll take the fried," said Carrie as the dish was passed to her. "The fried?" stammered Miss Mortimer. Yes, I prefer those. But there are no fried. I baked them. Well, how funny, laughed Carrie. I thought we had it all fixed yesterday. I thought we were to have both fried and baked. Mother always did, you know. You see, we don't like them the same way. Never mind, she added with a beaming smile, quite misunderstanding the look on her cousin's face. It doesn't matter a bit, and you mustn't feel so bad. It'll be all right tomorrow, I'm sure. Yes, and I want buckwheat cakes, please, piped up Rob. All right, you shall have them, agreed Cousin Helen with a smile. Tom laughed. Maybe you don't quite know what you're getting into, Cousin Helen, he suggested. If you make buckwheat cakes for Rob, it means graham muffins for Rose. Then she shall have them the very next morning, too. Oh no, that will never do. She demands them the same day. What? Oh, I thought you didn't understand, chuckled Tom. When you make one, you have to make both. Mother always did. She had to. 'Twas the only way she could suit both the twins, and I don't believe you'll find any other way out of it. As for us, we don't mind. We eat them all. Oh, said Cousin Helen faintly. And another thing, resumed Tom. We might as well settle the drink question right away. Of course you'll want to know. Father is the only one who drinks cereal coffee. We, Carrie and I, like the real thing, every time. And the twins have cocoa. Weak, of course, so there's not much to it. And you mustn't sweeten mine while you're cooking it, interposed Rose decidedly. Sure enough, lucky you thought of that, laughed Tom. Or else poor Cousin Helen would have had another mistake to fret over. You see, he explained pleasantly, Rose insists on putting in all the sugar herself, so hers has to be made unsweetened, but Rob isn't so particular and prefers his made in a regular way, sweetened while cooking, you know. Oh, I make 2 kinds of cocoa, do I? Asked Cousin Helen. Yes, that is in 2 ways. And coffee and the cereal drink, making 4 in all, continued Cousin Helen with ominous sweetness. Tom stirred uneasily and threw a sharp glance into his cousin's face. Well, it does seem a good many, but, well, Mother did, you know, and we might as well have what we want as something different, I suppose, he finished with vague uneasiness. Oh, certainly, who wouldn't mind a small thing like that? Laughed Miss Mortimer, a queer little gleam in her eyes. This was but the beginning. On the pantry shelf were 4 kinds of cereals. Carrie explained that all were served each morning, for the family couldn't agree on any particular one. As for eggs, Tom always had to have his dropped on a slice of toast. The twins liked theirs scrambled, but Carrie herself preferred hers boiled in the shell. Apple pie must always be in the house for Tom, though it happened, strangely enough, Carrie said, that no one else cared for it at all. Mother was always making apple pie, laughed Carrie apologetically. You see, they get stale so quickly, and Tom is the only one to eat them. They have to be made pretty often, 1 at a time, of course. Bread, rolls, pastry, meat, vegetables, each had its own particular story, backed always by that ever-silencing, Mother did, until Miss Mortimer was almost in despair. Sometimes she made a feeble protest, but the children were so good-natured, so entirely unaware that they were asking anything out of the ordinary, and so amazed at any proposed deviation from the established rules, that her protests fell powerless at their feet. Mother did, Mother did, Mother did, Miss Mortimer would murmur wearily to herself each day, until she came to think of the tired little woman upstairs as Mother did, instead of Aunt Maria. No wonder Mother did fell ill, she thought bitterly. Who wouldn't? The weeks passed, as weeks will, even the dreariest of them, and the day came for Cousin Helen to go home, Mrs. Dudley being now quite her old self. Loud were the regrets at her departure, and overwhelming were the thanks and blessings showered in loving profusion. But it was 2 weeks later, when Tom, Carrie, and the twins each sent her a birthday present, that an idea came to Miss Mortimer. She determined at once to carry it out, even though the process might cause her some heartache. Thus it came about that Tom, Carrie, Rob, and Rose each received a letter, together with the gift each had sent, almost by return mail. Tom's ran, "My dear cousin, thank you very much for the novel you sent me, but I am going to ask you to change it for a book of travels. I like that kind better, and Mother and all my friends give me travels whenever they want to please me. I might as well have something I want as something different, I suppose, so I'm asking you to change. Very lovingly, your cousin Helen." Carrie read this. "My dear Carrie, thank you for the pretty little turnover collar and cuffs you sent me for my birthday, but I think it is so funny you never noticed that I don't care for pink. Mother found it out even when I was but little more than a baby. Oh, I can wear it, but I don't care for it. Don't feel badly, however, my dear Carrie. All you've got to do is just take these back and make me some blue ones, and I know you won't mind doing that. Lovingly, Cousin Helen." Rob's letter ran, "My dear Rob, I am writing to thank you for the box of chocolates you sent yesterday. I am sending them back to you, though, because I seldom eat chocolates. Oh no, they don't hurt me, but I don't like them as well as I do caramels, so won't you please change them? Mother gives me a box of candy every Christmas, but it is never chocolates. I know you would rather give me what I like, Rob dear. Lots of love, Cousin Helen." Rose had striven early and late over a crocheted tidy, spending long hours of her playtime in doing work to which her fingers were but little accustomed. She confidently expected a loving letter of thanks and praise, and could scarcely wait to open the envelope. This is what she read. "My dear Rose, thank you very much for the tidy, dear, but whatever in the world caused you to make it in that stitch? I like shell stitch ever so much better, so would you mind doing it over for me? I'm returning this one, for maybe you will decide to ravel it out. If you don't, you can just make me a new one. Mother has crocheted several things for me, but most of them are in shell stitch, which, after all, is about the only stitch I care for. Lots of love from your cousin Helen." After a dazed 5 minutes of letter reading, the 4 children hurried to the attic, always their refuge for a conference. There they read the 4 letters aloud, one after another. A dumbfounded silence followed the last word. Rose was the first to break it. "I think she's a mean old thing, so there!" Rose was almost crying. "Hush, dear, hush," choked Carrie. "She isn't mean. She's good and kind. We know she is. She means something by it. She must. Let's read them again." Bit by bit they went over the letters. It was at the 3rd mention of Mother that Tom raised his head with a jerk. He looked sheepishly into Carrie's face. I guess I know," he said with a shamefaced laugh. It must have been a month later that Miss Mortimer received a letter from Mrs. Dudley. One paragraph sent a quick wave of colour to the reader's face, and this was the paragraph. "I am feeling better than for a long time. Some way the work doesn't seem nearly so hard as it used to. Perhaps it is because I am stronger, or perhaps it is because the children are not nearly so particular about their food as they used to be. I am so glad, for it worried me sometimes. They were so very fussy. I wondered how they would get along out in the world where Mother couldn't fix everything to their liking. Perhaps you noticed it when you were here. At any rate, they are lots better now. Perhaps they have outgrown it. I hope so, I'm sure." End of When Mother Fell Ill by Eleanor H. Porter. Read by Corrie Samuel.